Are you looking to become a mensch? I'm Robbie.
I'm Mark. Welcome to the Mensch Podcast, the show that guides and inspires Jewish youth and turns them into change makers.
We talk a lot on this show about courage, about what it means to stand up for who you are, even when it's uncomfortable. But most of us will never be tested the way our guest today was.
Standing up for the Jewish people isn't always a feel-good story. Sometimes it means standing alone and in the process, risking your career, your reputation, and your sense of safety in the very institution that you gave your professional life to.
Our guest today did exactly that. Shai Davidai is an Israeli-born professor, activist, and podcaster who became one of the leading voices in speaking out against anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in the United States after October 7th. Growing up in Israel, Shai served 3 years in the Israeli Navy and eventually made his way to New York City, where he joined the faculty at Columbia Business School.
In October 2023, just weeks after the Hamas attack on Israel, he went viral for delivering a speech condemning his own university for allowing what he called pro-terror student demonstrations and encampments and telling parents directly that their children on Ivy League campuses were not safe.
What followed was years of public confrontation, suspension from teaching, and an extremely lengthy and bureaucratic university investigation into his conduct. He was temporarily barred from campus, but ultimately cleared, with the university admitting he had done nothing wrong.
He has since left Columbia, saying his goal now is to educate people and amplify other voices through a podcast, speaking engagements across the country, and a book coming out soon titled American Intellectual Antisemitism, detailing the process of ideological radicalism that penetrated elite institutions across the country.
He didn't wait for someone to speak up. He didn't calculate what was safe or politically convenient for his career. He just said what he believed and stuck to his ethical principles and Jewish identity. Shai, thank you and welcome to the Mensch Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Menches.
Let's jump right in. So, for many people who know your name but not your full story, who was Shai Davidai before October 7th, and how did the events of that day change the course of your life?
Whoa, okay, diving right in. So look, first of all, if you don't know who I am, that's good. You know, people shouldn't know the name of a nerdy professor. Like in an ideal world, you would never know who I am because I would just be a professor at my university teaching, doing research. And that's who I was on October 6, 2023, right? I obviously cared a lot about the world, cared a lot about issues. A lot of it I tackled in my research. I tackled it in my teaching. But I was not a public person. That's not who I wanted to be. That was not my inspiration. My son, when he was 4, said, hey, Abba, I want to be famous one day. And I said, why? And he didn't have an answer. And I said, it's not about being famous. It's about what you're famous for. You can be famous for good things or bad things. So if you don't know who I am or didn't know who I was, fine. That's good. That's good. The person that I've become is actually more interesting right now. And that's partially because of the situation I found myself. I found myself surrounded by hatred and ignorance in my university. And then when I looked at the adults that were responsible, you know, the presidents, the vice president, the deans, I found myself surrounded by indifference. And hatred, ignorance, and indifference together kind of like pushed me to say like, hey, can I curse here? I can curse here, right? What the fuck is going on? Like, what the hell? Like, what's, like, this isn't what we promised the world that we're going to do at universities. And I spoke up. My wife took a video. And it just like fire in a dry field. Like it just, everybody started sharing, not because there's something important or special about me, but because what I said resonated with them. So that's how it changed me. Now I understand that when you speak up and if you use technology well, you can make a slight difference.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, you mentioned how it was kind of the leadership of Columbia and, you know, the inept policies and the lack and failure of support for the Jewish students that they had after October 7th that kind of ignited you to turn from kind of a private Jew to more of an outspoken and public one. So you also wrote an article where you explained your decision to leave Columbia, and you described the same faculty and administration as, quote, spineless, morally lost, and always begging for forgiveness. Do you see Columbia more as an isolated case of failed leadership, or is it more of a microcosm of this inept leadership at elite and higher institutions across the United States?
Colombia is not special in any way. It's a symptom of a much bigger problem that is affecting not just Colombia, but many of the elite, expensive universities and outside of universities. We see it in the media, we see it in therapy, we see it in so many different places. We see it in BDS votes, right? But the reason I focus on Colombia is one, that's where I was, right? Like people think that I'm some sort of angry, hateful person against Colombia. No, I love or used to love Colombia. It was my home. My wife graduated from there. Her cousin graduated from there. Her grandfather was a professor at Columbia in the 1970s. When you love something so deeply and you see it go wrong, you fight for it. And the second reason is that Colombia is not special or unique, but it is the ground zero of a lot of what we saw, both in terms of the protests and the encampments and the violent takeover of buildings, both in terms of people like Mahmoud Khalil and Mohsen Madawi, but also in terms of the ideology. And that's the problem. Like, what are the ideas? And the ideas at Colombia are a problem.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of like how the ideas like at Columbia are a problem. So what would you say maybe is a specific ideal that you noticed that really caused you to be like disillusioned with the university? Or are there a few that maybe you think were really problematic?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are problematic. You can't, when you have a big problem like anti-Semitism, like Jew hatred, let's call it what it is. It's not one thing. But if I had to say what the top thing that really frustrated me about Colombia is they no longer cared about the truth. They no longer cared about the facts, about the logic, about the evidence, and they swayed toward only caring about ideology. Now, when I got a tattoo after October 7, I have a lot of tattoos. The first one I got, it says Emet, truth.
Wow.
And it's because that's what motivates me. And I tell people, like, I would have fought this even if I wasn't Israeli, even if I wasn't Jewish, even if it had nothing to do about Israel and about the Jewish people. I would have fought this because this is hatred that masquerades as fact. But in fact, when you take people and you tell them, like, what are the facts here? What are you basing this on? And you realize, like, this is not facts. They are just on flimsy ground. Look, this. I know you guys are like almost in college, not yet. And I know a lot of your listeners are going to go to college and learn and study. And you should know, like, it's not that all the universities are bad. And it also doesn't mean that Columbia itself is rotten to the core. If you go and you study STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math at Columbia, you're probably not going to see this BS. If you're going to be pre-med, you're not going to see this BS. Computer science, you're probably not going to see this BS, right? Because those are things that are focused on fact. You can't be a doctor, cut someone open, and say, well, I know that's the stomach, but I really feel like that's the lung. Like, that doesn't work that way. But if you go to the humanities at Columbia, if you go to some of the social sciences, that's basically what you're trained to do. You open up society, you cut it up, you see a war, a horrible war, a very problematic war, and you say, that's not a war, that's genocide. Or you see a wall of separation that separates two different nations, not based on race, and you cut it up and you say, oh, that's not security measures because of suicide bombing, that's apartheid. So you see, they take something that is completely a lie, but they teach it as the truth. So I tell people, go to Columbia, go to Harvard, go to all these places, but not to their humanities and definitely not to their social sciences.
Yeah, I think that analogy is great. And I was just wondering, do you think that in these departments, such as social sciences and humanities that you mentioned, is Columbia closing the door, per se, on truth and on, historically what Western universities taught to their students? Is that more of them kind of, is it due to their weak knees and suffocating due to the pressure and overwhelming anti-Israel notions within their campus and the students? Or is it more of a long-term trend that preceded October 7th and, had some external influences from outside the country or foreign players, or a combination of both?
So October 7 accelerated this. It's lies on steroids. But this is something that started way, way, way before. Like we're talking in the 1960s, 1970s, when moral relativism came into play. And if you don't know what moral relativism is, that's good. Like a normal, common sense person should know what it is, but not really have to deal with it in their lives. But the ideas of moral relativism is, one, nothing is absolute, and two, nothing is if nothing is absolute, there's no truth, and then everything is okay. Now, sounds like, okay, this is very philosophical. What does this mean? This means that if you're at Columbia or at Harvard or wherever, and you say murdering children is not always bad, right? Now, of course, someone can take that clip of me and share it, but they know that I don't believe that.
People have to respect the opinion now.
Right, but now you have to accept, you have to accept that opinion. You can't say, yes, it always is, because that's coming from a place of saying that there's some moral truths are truer or have more ground than others, right? And now, what can you build off of that lie? Now you can build off of that lie an entire theory. Now, so you'd say, okay, so what does this have to do with October 7, with Israel, with Jews? Well, when they saw the images coming out of Israel, they see the slaughter, the massacre, the torture, the rape, first, some of them said, this is BS, I don't believe it, right? So that's completely just like people that are so close-minded. But other people said, yes, this happened, but it's not that bad, right? So they accept that reality happens because, whatever you want to do at Columbia, reality does happen. But then they started bringing this moral relativism.
Hamas
It's not
freedom
that
fighters.
Hamas are freedom fighters, right? So we changed the name. Gaza is not under siege, but it's a concentration camp, right? Kfir Bibas and Ariel Bibas, they were kidnapped not because they are babies, but because they are settlers, right? They start changing the whole morality of it. And that's okay, because throughout history, people have done that, but never in such elite universities. Because the difference between a crazy person saying a conspiracy theory and a crazy Columbia professor saying a conspiracy theory is that the Columbia professor gets to write books about it, we're going to go on TV about it, and they get to say, I am from Columbia, you should listen to me.
I think that's a really important point. It's how, especially at universities, they become, I think, a breeding ground for ideological radicalization among young students and even professors. So I think maybe two things that could influence that are Marxist or critical theory. So how significant do you believe these influences have been in shaping campus culture? And is this trend potentially reversible?
Everything is reversible. Let's start with that. Everything is reversible. And it's reversible not how Columbia wants it to be, which is like, let's just close our eyes, put our hands in the sand, and it'll go away. Because that's not how things work. But it is reversible in the sense that if we figure out how this happened, if we learn the mechanisms, the money, the processes that led to this, we can just use those against themselves, right? Think of it, now as we're recording, it's the NBA finals. What does a team do when they're playing the finals? Well, they focus on how they played, and they focus on videos again and again of how the other team played, right? That's how we should be doing things. We know that the ideology started around the 60s, 70s, the 80s with the 1982 war. We know that it really got energized in the 2000s with Students for Justice in Palestine. We know that, there's been a certain key players, key influencers, like we can figure all of those things out, and a lot of it we know. And now the question is, how do we do this? How do we fight against this? How do we use the same playbook to bring good ideas? Because the idea, we don't want to take bad ideas and replace them with different bad ideas that we like, right? We want to take bad ideas and replace them with good ideas, with smart ideas, with the truth, or at least with getting students and faculty to think, right? When we do that, it's going to reverse course. Now, that's not going to bring back the lost years of college students who've been at Columbia in the past decade or so, right? It's not going to reverse back the people that were inspired to kill based on this ideology, like in Boulder, Colorado, in Washington, D.C., in Bondi Beach, and that's all the same ideology. It's not going to bring back the people, but we can make sure that never happens again.
Yeah. You touched on earlier how Jewish students, they shouldn't completely turn their back on institutions such as Columbia, where maybe only the humanities and social sciences department, pre-med, STEM classes, you said are okay. So this is more of a personal question, but as me and Robbie are applying to college next year, I personally had schools such as Columbia, Brown, other universities where there were encampments and very bad responses to, Jewish rallying calls for help and cries for help. So in these places, anti-Semitism has become tolerated, normalized, and even encouraged. So there's this dilemma in my head where I think if Jewish students stop applying to these places, it almost feels like we're surrendering them, and there's not going to be a Jewish presence on the campus. And at the same time, I do feel like even in these most dire universities where there's so much anti-Semitism and persecution of Jewish students, I have a responsibility, as a Jewish high schooler, to keep the campus alive with Jews and make sure that it's not completely abandoned, so we maintain a continuous Jewish presence, or else, it's really like handing them the victory and saying, oh, anti-Semitism can be tolerated here, and it's actually a good mechanism of deterring Jews from applying. So how should students like myself balance these concerns about safety and belonging with the importance of maintaining a strong Jewish presence on campus and really keeping it alive for Jewish students in the future?
Yeah, this is the dilemma that so many Jewish teens and their parents are facing right now, and they've faced this for a few years now. I'll tell you this. I want every Jewish teen to go to where they can get into and that they want to go. Don't go to Harvard or Columbia or Yale or Brown just because of the name. The name is BS. It really is BS. Like when you pay $90,000 for an elite university, you're paying $20,000 for your education and $70,000 for a brand, right? Just like you go, like if you wear a Nike shirt, you're paying 80% not for the fabric, but just so it says Nike. Now, at the same time, the $20,000 that goes for your education, that is important, and you can get a great education in all these places. Now, I do tell them, go wherever you can, go wherever you want, but when you go, represent. Represent yourself and the Jewish people with pride. If you go to a place where there's a lot of anti-Semitism, well, buckle up, because you're going to be one of the Jewish students who organizes counter-protests, who brings in speakers to explain why this is wrong, who writes for the student paper, who runs for student government, do all that. And if you go to a school where there's no anti-Semitism or very little anti-Semitism, buckle up. You're going to be the one to go and build Jewish life there and teach people about Jews, about Judaism, about Israel, because the problem is not the protesters. It's not the haters. Most people, the problem is that they don't know what's going on at all.
It's ignorance.
So you have a responsibility wherever you go. Now, there's another added question. Should we give money to these places, right? Now, if you can get a scholarship to one of these places, go, because you know what? You're taking their money. Take their money. Screw them. But a lot of us, most of the people will not get a scholarship or a full scholarship, and they have to pay. When you pay to a university, treat the university the way it treats you. If Columbia treats you like a customer rather than a student, you treat it as a business rather than a school. That means you go to classes, you get the most that you can, you go to your professors, you do everything you can. But just like in a business, the moment they don't give you the service that they promised, then you push back, you fight back, and you maybe even sue, right? Hopefully you don't get to that. But schools, they don't, especially Columbia and Harvard, they don't see you as students. They see you as dollar signs.
Yeah.
And that's fine. It's okay to pay a lot of money if you get the service that you're paying for. But the moment that you don't, that's when you got to start like saying, hey, what the hell's going on here?
I think that's a really good point. It's just not looking at schools as more of like an education, as I think the whole institution of higher education has kind of begun corrupt and kind of became more for the profit rather than for the education that it would provide. And you mentioned that if you don't get this education and you're not getting the service that you maybe pay for, to kind of speak out. So what would you maybe tell a teenager who's going to college, who's maybe anxious about speaking out, or also on the other end, like speaking about their Jewish identity in the climate where it's, I think, really dangerous as well as anti-Semitic?
Look, there are three reasons why most Jews are afraid to speak up, right? One, they just don't feel comfortable enough in their knowledge, right? They just don't feel like, I can say a few sentences, but once I get pushback, or maybe not even pushback, just a question, I might not know, right? So one is not knowing. Two is not knowing how to speak up, right? There are a lot of people who say, like, I've read the books, I've watched the movies, I know everything, but I'm just not a public speaker. I don't know how to articulate myself. And three, which is maybe the worst, they're afraid they'll lose their friends, they won't make social connections. So let's fight those three things together. Number one, you got to educate yourself. Now, you can do it yourself. You can go on like websites like Unpacked. It's a YouTube channel. You can go, we talked about Club Z, Stand With Us. You can go to all these organizations that teach you like, hey, like, obviously this is a 3,000-year-long history. You're not going to know everything, but here's the starting point. Here's the books. Here are the things that you want to learn, right? So educate yourself. And I tell that to adults as well, because adults the problem is they think they know more than they do, right? So even just like listening to podcasts, right? Number two, you gotta practice speaking up, not just what you're speaking about, but just the fact that you're speaking up, right? There are things online on how to speak up in front of people. If you want to use your voice not in speaking in front of people, but writing, you can practice writing op-eds, stuff like that. Some people are very artistically talented, and I tell them, you don't need to go and speak up in class, but make infographics and posters and go at night and stick them all over campus. That's speaking up for you, right? So that's dealing with the how to do it. And the third is the social pressure. You're going to get so much social pressure to just keep your mouth shut. When you do, two things I want you to keep in mind. One, if someone doesn't want you to speak up, they're not really your friend. And it doesn't matter if it's about Jewish or anything. Like if someone says, hey, take part of your identity and keep that silent, they're not your friend. They don't want what's good for you. They want what's good for them. But the second thing is look around you and find the other people that are quiet. Most likely, they believe in you and you believe in them in the same values, and speak up together, right? You don't need to be the most popular person in school. And probably if you speak up about anything that goes against something on campuses, you won't be the most popular. But you just need your group of 10, 20, 30 friends. And if you find those people, educate yourselves together and practice speaking up, you're gonna do a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, I think those are three extremely important points for our listeners to take away from this. And the underlying trend is that Jewish teens, they need to, and maybe this starts with, the family and raising kids, but they need to make sure that they're educated Jewish teenagers and that they're actually out there doing something. So, for example, a Jew that, goes to synagogue every week is somewhat educated about, the religious side of Judaism, kind of maybe lives in a bubble where they're friends with a lot of religious Jews. Well, that's not really going to save them when they end up on these campuses and they're going to be forced into debates about the existence of the state of Israel and anti-Semitism on campuses. They have to be educated and knowledgeable about the facts and be prepared to have these conversations and get pushed into the scenario in this hotbed of conflict at these universities. And
let me tell you one more thing. When you learn and educate yourself, don't be afraid to touch the third rail, the sticky subjects, right? Like when you start learning, you'll find out that Jews are not perfect, that Israel's not perfect, that our ancestors have done things that are not always something you want to be proud of. And that's okay, because you need to know the bad things as well, and how we reacted to the bad things and how we improved upon them so that we can get better. Right? So don't try to educate yourself just on the perfect view of who we are.
And it's also much easier you talked a lot about how most people at these campuses, they're not vehemently anti-Israel or anti-Semitic. Most of them are just ignorant or don't know anything. And when you establish an argument or have a debate that's nuanced, where you can admit that Israel has faults and you admit that Israel had a miscalculation here, did something wrong here, it's a lot easier to actually sway them into your side. So because they don't see you as completely closed-minded and just completely polarized on one side. So I think that's a very critical point, that we need to also have nuance and admit when, Israel has defeats or did something wrong, because that's, I think, going to be a very important part of bringing in people, kind of the third party that aren't very pro-Palestinian, not pro-Israel yet. They just don't know much. I think that's a big thing in bringing them to our camp and understanding our side. And then the third thing you mentioned was actually speaking up about the truth. And I think we talked about this with Tessa Wexler a few weeks ago. At some point, you have to choose in your college experience if you want to be liked, she said, or if you want to stand up for the truth. And I think that's going to be also a big decision in the future of many Jewish students, is do they want to be liked around campus, or do they want to stick to their ethical principles and their morals and stand up for the truth that you were talking about earlier that colleges aren't really promoting anymore. So with that in mind, do you have hope for this new generation of Jewish teens and Jewish youth that's coming into the college campuses? Do you think that it's possible that you said already that this trend is always reversible, but do you have hope that these Jewish teens can accomplish this goal?
Yeah, I have a lot of hope. I wouldn't be fighting this if I didn't have hope. Now, I have hope not just for the Jewish teens, but for teens in general, because the generation that came before you, I've lost track what letters they give them now, but think about people that are 10, 15 years older than you. Those people grew up with phones and screens glued to their face and didn't realize the problems in it. So they are just so easily influenced. You guys, you grew up with the same phones, but you were also already knowing that you can't trust what you see. That just because a video is sad and horrific doesn't even mean it's true, right? So you've grown up with a bit more critical thinking. And I think we're going to reverse this ignorance that have taken over. Now, the thing that most important for keeping hope is, and I'll take that framing of you of you don't need to be liked, or if you choose not to be liked or whatever you said, I would say it's not about that. It's about you need to figure out who you want to be liked by and why, right? And I see a lot of Jewish teens standing up and saying, I don't care if this group of 100 keffiyeh-clad persons that are afraid to show their face don't like me. What I care about is whether there's another Jewish student in another college who looks at what I've said, looks at what I've written, and say, you know what? I stand with you, right? They like me, I like them, and that gives me all the strength. When I work with adults, I tell them, do you want to be liked by your colleagues, or do you want to be liked by your kids, right? Who's more important to you? When you're on your deathbed, years from now, are you going to think about all the pals you had on campus, or are you going to think about what your grandchildren think about what you left for them, right? So really, I do have a lot of hope for the Jewish teens.
Yeah, I think that's definitely uplifting to hear as someone who's been exposed to a lot of anti-Semitism even in high schools, and seeing how it's kind of become pervasive among the teens around me in this kind of casualized anti-Semitism. But I do agree with you that I think there is hope, and that Jewish teens should kind of drift away from the notion of do they want to be liked by everyone versus selectively choosing who to identify with. So just to transition a little bit more about you and your work. Tell us a little bit about your podcast, Here I Am. What gap were you hoping to fill with that podcast that you felt wasn't being addressed anywhere else?
Look, when I started this, I had no idea, how to make a podcast. I didn't know idea how to ask questions, none of it. I was just sitting at home, seeing everything that's going in the world and seeing this amazing platform that I got, like these hundreds of thousands of followers. And I said, I got to use this for good. I got to use this to help other people who don't get that platform, right? And the original idea was I'll go and I'll just do a podcast around the country with students. It will be the professor and the students talking about anti-Semitism. And I reached out to a couple of people and they were really nice. They'd say like, yeah, we'll produce it. And we developed a story to be not just about colleges, but about anyone who's fighting. And the idea is very simple. When you open up an episode of Here I Am, you don't know if you're going to get a famous person, like I've interviewed Deborah Messing and Mayim Bialik, or you're going to get someone you've never heard of. And that's intentional because someone you've never heard of is not less worthy or less smart or less impactful than someone with 5 million followers, right? The 5 million followers also come with good reason. So I just try to amplify as many people doing a lot of great stuff. After a while, I realized that no one was really focusing on our allies. So I did a few seasons mostly focused just on allies, amplifying the allies. Instead of crying like, where are our allies? I said, let's give a microphone to those that are speaking up and amplify them. And the idea is just to change the conversation, just a little bit, right? I know it's a podcast. It's not going to change the world, but it might change a few minds. And those minds might end up doing something a bit different and making a change on their worlds. And it's a beautiful thing to do.
I really love that ideology. I think that really is similar to what we had in our podcast. And I think your podcast as well really was a large influence to what we wanted with our podcast. And I think what you mentioned is just having guests of all sizes. Like we've had you, for example, and we've had Tessa Vexler, and then we've also had just leaders in our community and just leaders that we've met and we thought had really interesting stories. I think that really helped us understand what we want to do, and it's really gave us a variety of what we are looking on. I think that's really just fascinating to see what your goal just started.
Also listen, when you think about it, not as the host of a podcast, but as someone who listens to a podcast. If you listen to a podcast and you hear about this person who was extremely successful in Hollywood and then spoke up, or someone like me who ended up being a professor and spoke up, right? It might be inspiring at some point, but it's not relatable, right? How many Hollywood people, you say, I'm not a Hollywood person. But if you listen to a podcast and you see someone who's just a teenager or a student or a parent, a mom, a dad, a grandpa, whatever, and they decided to do something, then you listen and you say, you know what? I can do something too. Maybe not the exact way, but if they have the balls to do that, why not me? And that's, to me, the point of activism. Asking yourself, why not me?
I think that's a very, very commendable kind of mission of yours. And I think that it's pretty rare in the podcasting world where you see most podcasts like Lex Friedman, Joe Rogan. They're mostly amplifying names that are already pretty well known, kind of maybe the leaders in every niche, in every topic. But I think it's very respectable when you bring in people from all sides, people who don't have anything less to give, but maybe they're less known, and so that can play a big part in amplifying their voices. Just being on your podcast,
when you think of also those podcasts, and a lot of podcasts, they do it for money. They do it for likes. They do it for that heart on Instagram. They do it for that retweet. That's not the goal. That's not my goal for Here I Am. It's not the goal for this new podcast I have. It's not the goal that I think you guys my podcast is about changing the conversation. And I've always said, if people stop listening, I'll stop doing it, because my goal is not to be famous. It's to have some impact.
Yeah. And though you definitely say that that's not your goal, I think it's safe to say you've become one of the leading forces for the Jewish community post October 7th and one of the most recognizable public voices on the issue. So I was going to ask, what has this maybe unintentional visibility cost you both personally and professionally in your life since?
Look, professionally, I had to leave my job. I decided I couldn't be there anymore. It completely sidetracked my entire career. Right? I don't know how much you know about how professors operate, but basically you go on a tenure track. It's somewhere between 6 and 10 years. You work really hard, and then if your colleagues think you're smart enough, and honestly, if they just think you're not a troublemaker and they like you, they give you tenure, and then you're set for life. That was my goal. Like about now, I was supposed to go up for tenure and hopefully get tenure, and then for the rest of my life, have a stable job, stable income, everything. Then October 7 happens, then I spoke up, and then everything changed. So professionally, I'm still figuring it out. In terms of personally, I was never interested in being a public figure, but now I also know why. It's not who I am. I love having the ability to impact people, but I have no desire or need to be recognized, right? So, but it did change me in the fact that now that I have a big microphone, I'm able to use it, and I see it as a responsibility to use it now, not to make videos. And sometimes I want to make a video about, like, here's what I did today, and then I was like, who fucking cares what I did today, other than my parents, my wife, and my kids who are probably with me. But so I stop myself and I don't do those videos. But if I read something online or in the news and I say, you know what, somebody has to say something about this, that's when I post the videos, because I realize, like, it's not about being an influencer, it's about influencing the conversation.
I think that's really beautiful. And it's like you mentioned how a lot of professors don't want to speak up because they want the tenure path and they're too afraid to risk their job. And I probably understand it was probably difficult for you to do that and sacrifice a stable career path to speak out and make your impact heard. So I think you mentioned that you had former colleagues and faculty members and even students who kind of privately told you that they agreed, but were kind of afraid to speak out publicly. So what do you think that kind of reveals about education today?
Yeah. Look, it's bigger than education. It really is. It's a great question. It's bigger than education. I wear these shirts. Like now I'm wearing a shirt that says, I don't know if you can see it. It says every Jew counts. Right? Sometimes I wear a shirt that says, this is what a Zionist looks like. And I've started I make these shirts and I wear them kind of like to push it in people's faces to change the conversation. And a lot of people on the street say, like, hey, good job, and then I talk to them and they say, hey, I make these shirts, do you want one? And they say, like, no, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to wear it. And I'm like, bullshit, like, I'm wearing this. You just commented, good job. I do get some hate, but most of the comments are great. Now that's just my shirt. That's the same thing, like when people speaking up, like, bullshit. Like, why can't you say something? I'm not saying burn all the bridges. I'm not saying go and threaten to quit. But are you not going to check the line? Like, up until that line, that border of, like, don't cross it, why not speak up? And the thing is that people don't realize, when you don't speak up and you tell other people, oh, good for you, what you're basically saying, now you have to speak for both of us, right? If there's 10 people in a room and only one of them speaks up, that one person needs to speak not in the volume of one person, they need to speak in a volume of 10 people. So if you really support what someone is doing, help them do it, right? 2 people speaking up means that I can take half a day off, right? And you can focus on what's happening here, I can focus on what's happening there. But if only one of us speaks up, I or you have to do everything. And yes, you're going to pay a price for speaking up. By the way, you're going to pay the price for speaking up in anything. You think if you're going to play sports in a basketball team and your coach is going to do something you think is wrong, and you speak up against the coach, you're not going to be benched? Maybe you will. But if your ideas are good, maybe they'll get used and maybe they'll get you to win, right? So, yeah, speaking up is scary, but the alternative, keeping quiet when you want to say something, is even scarier.
Yeah. Do you think that that process or that example that you gave about the guy complimenting your shirt, do you think that's potentially a symptom of maybe the bystander effect within the Jewish community, where a lot of members might be, diffusing responsibility and thinking that it's not their fight to do, and maybe they don't perceive any danger towards their Judaism themselves because maybe they're secular, and so they don't have any responsibility or desire to fight, but maybe they're ignorant that because these threats, they're not just for outspoken Jews, but it's going to affect and impact all Jews across the country, across the world. The Nazis didn't pick and choose.
Exactly. And that's something that I used to spend a lot of time worrying about, right? Like when I started speaking up, honestly, it was because nobody else was saying what I thought needed to be said. If someone was saying it, I probably would have kept my mouth shut or not have said it as loud. And when I said it and I started speaking up and I would raise my voice and I got so big, it was great because I was having some influence, but I was worried that it got too big too soon. And other people might think like, oh, now I don't have to say anything. Exactly. Right? So whenever you speak up, you're creating this dilemma. On the one hand, you might inspire other people to speak up. On the other hand, you might signal to people like, that's okay, I got this. Right. So yeah, I'm very worried about the diffusion of responsibility. I mean, my shirt literally says every Jew counts. Right. It's not just a statement for anti-Semites to be like, you can't beat us, but it's a statement for us Jews that like in the fight, every one of us is needed. Right. We can't just have 10% or 5% or 1% speaking up. We need all of us to do whatever, and some of them is speaking, some of them is funding, some of them is organizing, whatever it is. But whatever you do, you have to do something.
Yeah, I think everyone needs to speak up. And that's, I think, one of the most important parts of what we even have talked about on the podcast. It's just everyone needs to advocate. Everyone needs to speak up for what they believe, no matter what it is. And I think you have done a really amazing job on that. So looking ahead, what does the future hold for you? And what maybe projects or goals do you have to maybe advocate more or like speak up in the future?
So the biggest thing that I'm looking forward to is I have a book coming out in October called American Intellectual Antisemitism, the anti-Jewish movement tearing through our universities. And the reason I wrote this book was twofold. One, I realized like people lack the basic knowledge of what happened and how we got here. Like we talked a little bit about that, but I really wanted people to have a book where they can go and and after reading it, oh yeah, what was the thing? How did we get to a point where Zionism is seen like a horrible thing? And just almost like a manual. And the other thing is I wrote it so we have a record. So in the book, I mention a lot of the people that did fight back, that are fighting back. So that 20, 30, 40 years from now, you're not going to have people saying, yeah, I did something. It's like, no, you didn't. We're now keeping the records. We know who spoke up and who didn't. So that book is coming out in October, and it's already available for pre-order in Amazon and all the places. And honestly, what I'm going to try to do is get as many people to read the book. And I tell people, I don't care if you buy the book, you can take it from a local library, you can steal it, you can borrow it. I don't care. I want you to read it. It's not about the money, it's about the words. The other project that I'm working on is almost like the flip side of that coin, right? Because we can't just fight anti-Semitism. We have to be proud in who we are and really enrich and deepen our Jewish identity. Now, a lot of people know, because I speak about this, I'm an atheist. I'm not a religious Jew, but I am very, very Jewish, and I care deeply about my Judaism. So I started this small podcast. It's 7 minutes every week called Pragmatic Judaism, which looks at, what is it? How did we survive 3,000 years? Why did we create these things like the synagogue? We created that. Why did we create things like the bar mitzvah? What's the point of a bar mitzvah? Like I go every episode, very short, but like explaining these little things so that people know not just like what we're fighting against, but also what are we fighting for. So those are my two, pet projects these days.
I'll definitely be pre-ordering the book and checking out that podcast. And I think for all our viewers and listeners, it'll definitely be extremely helpful for them to read that and have this documentation for the future. Last few questions, I promise. So 5 years from now, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the state of Jewish life on American college campuses, and why?
5 years, I am optimistic it will be better than today, but I don't think we'll be at where we need to be in 5 years. You have to remember, the other side has been working for more than 30 years to slowly chip away at the institution. And just like your parents probably, when they renovate a place, renovate a home, you think you're going to just put a fresh coat of paint, and then you realize the foundations need to be strengthened. So it's going to take more than 5 years, but in 5 years, it's going to be better than today. In 15 years, I think we either win this battle, this ideological battle, or we say, we got to recalculate our route and figure out what's wrong.
Yeah, so I feel like in 15 years, you kind of set as like maybe your deadline to see if we won the battle or how we're doing. So what do you think the success would look like in the campuses, and how do you think universities will look maybe after those 15 years?
So in terms of our own personal fight against this new version of anti-Semitism, I think success will look in two ways. One is things that are now normalized will become again completely shameful and not normal. And I'm saying things like, saying that Hamas is not a terrorist organization, right? Saying that you support Iran over the United States. Like those things should not be normalized. And the flip side is that things that are now seen as negative or questionable should go back to being normal. Like I call myself a Zionist. I have shirts that says, this is what a Zionist looks like. I have shirts that says, I'm a Zionist, what's your superpower? Right? Like all these things, it's like, because I'm trying to normalize again what was normal up to like 10, 15 years ago and become crazy because of all of this. And success, when you're fighting an ideology, is replacing it with a better one. That people go to college and they'll see, and this is if we zoom out and not just Israel and Jews, but the United States, people go to campuses and they won't be able to know if this is a left wing or a right wing. All they'll be able to know that this is an American university that cares about the US and American democracy. If we get to that point, we know that we're in a good place.
Yeah, so it really comes down to stopping the anti-Americanism and anti-Westernism that's in these elite universities. Last question for you, Shai. If you could leave every Jewish teenager that's watching this podcast with one piece of advice, what would it be?
Don't wait to be older. Don't wait to be older. You have this imaginary idea, in 2 years I'll be 18, or in 4 years I'll be 22 or 20, or, when I'll be 30. It's like your parents are pretending to know what's going on. They have no idea what's going on. They're putting on a brave face for you, but they're just as scared and weirded out by everything. So don't wait until you're older to start fighting and start educating yourself, and be, I know it's very trite, but be the change you want to see in the world. Be that teenager that other people talk about and say, you know what? That's how I want teenagers to be. You can be that person.
Okay. Thank you. That was very sage.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you on, and definitely look forward to seeing all your future ventures and everything that you'll accomplish over the future.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having this podcast and for amplifying, young Jewish voices. Go ahead. That's amazing.